Wrestling is almost certainly the oldest sport in human history, and you and I do not just think that. We have actual archaeological proof, ancient cave murals, found in southern France dating back somewhere between 15 and 20,000 years ago show us what clearly looks like two figures grappling with each other, not hunting, not fleeing from a predator, but wrestling. Think about that. For a second, the oldest paintings humans ever created, these incredible, gorgeous pieces of prehistoric art, and tucked right in there among the bison and the handprints is basically a UFC highlight. Real, and it makes total sense. Wrestling requires absolutely nothing, no ball, no field, no stadium, just two people and that immediate question of which one of US is stronger. It is the most basic athletic question you can ask, and we have been asking it for at least 15,000 years. By 2000 BC, Egyptian tomb paintings at a place called Beni Hassan showed incredibly detailed wrestling scenes, and I mean seriously detailed, hundreds of figures, different holds, different takedowns, techniques pro wrestlers would still recognize today. These were not casual sketches, this was serious documentation. This was a culture that took wrestling seriously enough to etch it into the walls of their tombs and across the ancient world completely independently, with no contact with each other. Different civilizations were doing the exact same thing. Sumerians wrestled, Greeks wrestled, Japan developed sumo, China had its own forms of competitive grappling. Every single culture, no matter where on the planet, looked at wrestling and said, yes, this is a sport. There is something deeply human about that. Now, while grappling is easily the most recorded ancient sport, but you could easily argue that running actually came first. See, running isn't just some sport, it's how early humans survived. Here is a crazy fact that sounds totally fake but is entirely true. We are actually among the best long-distance runners on Earth, just not the speediest. Sure, a cheetah would smoke us in a quick sprint, and honestly, so would a horse, but in endurance, we're absolute elite. Some tribes in parts of Africa still hunt by literally jogging after their prey for hours until it collapses from utter exhaustion. It's called persistence hunting, and it works because we don't overheat the same way most four-legged animals do. So, when did running for survival turn into competition? Honestly, it was probably the second another human showed up. The competitive drive is just that old. By the time we reach ancient Egypt, running had already become a highly ceremonial event. They had something called the Hebsed Festival, where the pharaoh, yes, the ruler himself, had to run a sacred course just to prove he was still physically fit enough to rule. Basically, every couple of years he had to pass a public fitness test for everyone, or face some seriously uncomfortable whispers that maybe it was finally time for someone else to run things, literally. Then we finally get to ancient Greece, and the Greeks, as they did with everything, took running and turned it into something absolutely epic and slightly unhinged. The very first Olympics in 776 BC had only one event, a single-foot race called the Stadion, about 192 meters. Basically the length of the stadium, that's it. That was the whole Olympics, just one race. Yet thousands of excited spectators came to watch. Cities even declared temporary call truces during wars so athletes could travel in safety, and winners became absolute legends, not some rich athlete with a sneaker contract, but a literal legend. They wrote poetry for them, and sculptors carved their faces as legendary heroes just for sprinting down a track. Also, and I really feel this deserves its own spotlight, the ancient Greeks competed in the Olympic Games completely naked. Honestly, that was their whole vibe. No uniforms, no fancy compression gear, just human bodies, glistening with olive oil and running as fast as they could. There's a story about a runner named Orsippus winning a race in 720 BC solely because he intentionally dropped his shorts at the starting line because he performed so much better naked, and from that moment onward, every athlete went totally nude. Ancient sports were absolutely unhinged. Now, you and I need to discuss the ball game because everything we have seen so far actually makes total sense. Things like wrestling or running are easy for us to grasp, but what the ancient empires of Mesoamerica actually did with their ball game is on an entirely different level. This historic Mesoamerican sport is one of the oldest organized team games in human history, with roots tracing back to 1400 BC. Here is what makes it crazy. This was not just a game. It was a sacred ritual, a political statement, and often a matter of life and death all at once. The actual ball was made of heavy rubber and weighed about 8 to 10 pounds. 10 pounds. That is like trying to play sports with a heavy bowling ball, and players could not use hands or feet. They only used their hips, their forearms, and knees to keep that ball moving. Try to picture that for a second. Now, imagine doing it in a stone-lined court right in the middle of a city with thousands of excited people watching, and a giant stone hoop mounted way up on the wall, which you must somehow get this heavy ball through. The arenas themselves were absolute architectural masterpieces. The most famous surviving arena is at Chichen Itza, Mexico, is huge, 168 meters long. The heavy stone hoops used as goals are hung 8 meters off the ground and are barely wider than the ball itself. Sinking a shot in there was not just an amazing athletic achievement, it was basically a complete miracle. And now, the mystery that historians have debated for decades: what happened to those losers, or, depending on which theory you believe, the winners? Heavy evidence suggests that human sacrifice was linked to this intense ball game, where either the losing team, or in some stories the winning team, because being sacrificed was considered a major honor and a direct path to the gods, might have been executed to complete the ritual. Experts have actually found skulls carved right into the walls of these courts. Stone art shows headless figures. The grim imagery is quite hard to ignore. Still, historians debate how common this scary practice truly was. Not every game ended in death. Most matches were likely just sports, rivalries between cities, or political negotiations played out on the court, but the mere fact this sport existed in a culture where that terrifying outcome was actually possible says something incredible about what these ancient people believed athletics could be. This was not simple entertainment. It was communion with the gods. The ball represented the sun, the court symbolized the universe, and players acted out the cosmic battle between life and death. Next time someone tells you a regular match, honestly, it doesn't matter. Just remember that at some point in our history, it really did. Let's take a quick breather and head over to Egypt, because ancient Egypt is basically the one civilization that had a sport for everything. We already covered wrestling and running, but the ancient Egyptians were doing so much more. Tomb paintings and old hieroglyphs document an absolute mountain of athletic action: swimming, archery, javelin throwing, weightlifting, rowing, long jumping, gymnastics, and different ball games. They even had a version of field hockey. Paintings from around 2000 BC show athletes with curved sticks and a ball squaring off against each other. Just think about that. Field hockey 4,000 years ago. Someone in ancient Egypt actually invented field hockey. Swimming was incredibly popular along the Nile for obvious reasons. When your whole civilization is built around a massive river, swimming isn't just a sport, it's a basic survival skill, but Egyptian nobles trained in it competitively, and it was seen as a mark of physical education and high elite status. Archery in Egypt started out purely as a military and hunting skill. The mighty pharaohs were shown as elite archers because absolutely nothing says I am the divine ruler of the most powerful civilization on earth, quite like being able to nail a target from a fast-moving chariot. But over time, archery contests naturally became a sport in their own right, and here is my favorite detail from ancient Egyptian sports history. We have actual proof of fishing competitions, organized fishing tournaments where guys competed to catch the most or the biggest fish, complete with judges, roaring crowds, and surely intense trash talk about each other's bait technique. Ancient humans fished competitively. Think of course they did, no surprise there. We can't discuss legendary ancient sports without spending real time in ancient Greece, since those Greeks didn't just play games, they turned competition into pure philosophy. The iconic Olympics started in 776 BC and kept running for over 1,000 years. Just think about that. The Super Bowl has only been around for 60 years. The historic Olympics we are discussing lasted for 12 whole centuries. They were the most enduring athletic tradition in human history until a Roman emperor shut them down in 393 AD because he claimed they were pagan festivals, which, to be fair, they totally were, but those Greeks had more than just the Olympics. They held four massive pan-Hellenic festivals: the Olympics at Olympia, the Pythian Games held at Delphi, the Isthmian Games near Corinth, plus the intense Nemean Games. Winning all four was the ultimate grand slam of the ancient world, and competitors who did it were treated like literal gods. The contests actually evolved over the centuries. That simple, single sprint at the very first games slowly grew into a massive sports program with various running distances, including a race in heavy, full armor. Can you imagine sprinting in bronze helmets and heavy leg guards? I struggle running in sneakers. There was long jump, discus throwing, javelin, grappling, brutal boxing, and the absolute most terrifying match of all, the pancration. That name basically translates to all power or total force. It was precisely what it sounds like: ultimate mixed martial arts, basically ancient Greek MMA. Pretty much anything went: punching, kicking, chokeholds, and breaking joints. The only actions forbidden were biting and gouging eyes, which tells you everything about how wild those fights actually got. If organizers had to officially outlaw those specific moves, ancient pancration fighters became absolute legends. We still have wild stories of competitors winning matches even after they had already been choked completely unconscious because their body just kept fighting on reflex. There are unbelievable accounts of fighters who won by popping their own joints out just to escape brutal holds. This was no gentlemanly sport. This was raw, extraordinary violence with barely any rules, performed right before tens of thousands of screaming, bloodthirsty spectators. And the ultimate prize for surviving all of this, a simple wreath of leaves. Seriously, that is it. Olive leaves at Olympia, beautiful laurel at Delphi, pine at Corinth, and wild celery at Nemea. No cash prize, no big corporate sponsorship, just a leafy crown of plants and eternal glory. The ancient Greeks lived by a concept, arete, which meant excellence, the ultimate fulfillment of your human potential. Sports weren't just simple games, they were the highest expression of everything a human being could be. Your physical body was sacred, your athletic performance was basically a form of prayer. I want to give chariot racing the actual attention it truly deserves because it might be the most terrifyingly dangerous mainstream sport in human history. High-speed chariot racing in the ancient world, especially back in Rome, where races took over the giant Circus Maximus, drew up to 250,000 Fans, 250,000 in one stadium. Just watching chariots race, the circus. Maximus was easily the largest sports venue ever built in human history. Modern stadiums hold 80 to 100,000. At most, ancient Rome was doing double that. Over 2,000 years ago for chariot races. Each race was 7 fast laps around a giant central barrier called the spina. The turns were sharp. The speeds were crazy. Charioteers were usually lightweight, very young. Men, often slaves, who wrapped those heavy reins tightly around their bodies so they could throw their whole weight into the steering. The problem, the catch with that chariot design, you see, was that if you ended up crashing, and those wrecks happened constantly, you couldn't just drop the reins. You were tied to the leather, which meant you were being dragged at high speed behind to panicking horses. The smart chariot drivers kept a curved knife called a falx handy, just to cut themselves loose before those animals trampled them. Talk about prime time entertainment. This was the Roman Super Bowl. Those for main racing teams, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, had fan bases so wild they actually started riots in Constantinople in 530 to a D.A. riot between the blue and green factions spiraled so far out of control that it practically sparked a full revolution. Tens of thousands of people died. Even the Emperor Justinian almost fled the city over these intense sports team rivalries. We all have strong opinions about our favorite teams, but ancient Rome took it to an entirely different dimension. But here is what I find most fascinating about this whole thing. When we look back at ancient sports, wrestling depicted in prehistoric caves, Egyptian swimmers racing in the Nile, Mesoamerican athletes risking their lives for a rubber ball, Greek philosophers watching naked athletes launch heavy discs, you spot a pattern? Every single civilization, no matter their geography, no matter the era, or how isolated they were from the world, invented sports. Not a single ancient culture looked at the concept of physical competition and said, nah, that sounds exhausting. Let's skip it, because sports aren't just simple entertainment. They never were. They are a fundamental human technology. They build deep social bonds. When you are part of a team, sharing a tough loss or sharing a big win with someone builds a bond that is nearly impossible to recreate in any other way. Ancient societies really needed those bonds. A group of friends who trained and competed together were far more likely to cooperate, trust each other completely, and far more likely to act as one when real dangers popped up. Plus, sports are a safe outlet for conflict. Instead of going to actual war whenever two neighboring clans had a dispute, you could settle it on a field. That Mesoamerican ball game was definitely a political tool. Different cities negotiated through competition. The ancient Greek Olympic truce literally paused wars so these athletes could travel to the games safely. Sports as diplomacy, sports as peace, and sports are a way to answer a question that never stops being fascinating. What is the absolute limit of what our bodies can do? That question drove early cave dwellers to wrestle total strangers. It also pushed ancient Greek athletes to train for years to throw a discus 6 feet further than anyone had ever thrown it before. It drives modern people to obsess over hundredths of a second on the swimming clock. The games change, the technology changes, the rules change, but that question stays the same. Some ancient sports actually survived. Wrestling, running, javelin, and discus. They are still in our modern Olympics, keeping their basic structure completely unchanged. When you watch the 100-meter Olympic dash, you are watching the direct descendant of a foot race from 776 BC. Others just didn't make it. Pancration vanished for centuries, though modern MMA is its spiritual successor. Chariot racing vanished with the fall of Rome, but you could argue Formula One still carries its energy. that Mesoamerican. This ball game survived in different forms until the Spanish conquest basically wiped it out in the 16th century, and some of them vanished completely. Not just the games, but the rules, the rituals, the actual meaning. Take those cave paintings, which clearly show ancient people playing some type of competitive game that we just can't recognize anymore. Games played for thousands and thousands of years, with zero names, zero rule books, and no descriptions left behind, just stone carvings, showing someone doing something that obviously mattered enough to paint. Honestly, that's what gets me. The sheer effort people poured into playing, competing, and watching, agonizing over the final scores in the end for something that was, well, just a game. That drive is written across every corner of human history, even when everything else about those cultures has been erased, even when we've lost their words and names. Their stories, the sports survive. So, what did those ancient humans actually play? All of them, wrestling and foot races long before modern civilizations existed, organized ball games acting as cosmic rituals, wild swimming races along rivers, sacred to local gods, boxing where the only prize was some leaves, and eternal fame, and chariot races and massive stadiums that dwarf our modern mega venues. Strange games with no names, played by competitors we'll never ever know, in front of cheering crowds long turned to dust. Sport is not some random invention we made up way back in history and just kept doing. Competition is just built into human nature. It shows up wherever we gather. It is since the very beginning, and next time you feel that totally irrational, sudden rush when your home team scores, that feeling which completely bypasses logic and hits something much older and deeper. That wild animal inside your chest, it's not new. It's over 15,000 years old.